I hereby declare my candidacy for mayor.
A visionary leader who changed the course of Chicago history. Harold Washington defied the odds, defeating the machine to become Chicago's first black mayor.
You want Harold? Well, here's Harold.
His untimely death after the start of his second term in office left the city in shock, but his career inspired a new generation of leaders.
He did his job well.
A look back on his life and legacy for his centennial birthday.
Chicago, Chicago, my hometown.
WGN News Special, Harold Washington, honoring the people's mayor. With Jackie Grimshaw, political advisor and former legislative aide to Harold Washington. Judd Minor, former City of Chicago legal counsel for the Washington administration. Cook County Chief Judge Tim Evans, former 4th Ward Alderman and Council floor leader. And Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
Let's get right to it. You knew the mayor, you knew the mayor, you knew the mayor very close and intimately. Let's start off with some things you remember the most about him, because we want folks to know Mayor Washington when the cameras went off. Judge Evans?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind is how he liked to deal with issues very late at night and very early in the morning. Frequently, we would get a call about 2 o'clock.
In the morning?
In the morning, saying, well, we got some issues coming up the next day. I'd like you to come by. We would have biscuits and chicken at that hour from Gladys's restaurant. And we would stay there until we solved whatever the problem was that was on his mind.
Yeah.
It was expected, it was a part of the job, and we loved it. We loved it. We loved it.
Judd, you described a complex man. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, he's complex in every respect. First of all, he was very, very personable person and very comfortable with himself, although never cocky or arrogant, but self-confident. On the other hand, he had, and he loved policy. I would meet with him every morning, and we would plan things. We'd talk about what's happening, what legal implications were, and I could get a telephone call months later in which he would remind me of a conversation we'd had and tell me what had happened, who had confronted him with something, and ask me if that was the issue that we were talking about, and here's what was his response, and was that what we had in mind. So he was just involved in this nonstop, and he loved it. One of my jobs was that I would get called by Dolores Woods, the secretary, because I was supposed to stay late, and I was told what his schedule was and to please make sure the mayor got to this fundraiser or whatever it is, because he could get lost in issues and what was going on in his office and just not want to go, and my role was to go in and say, you've got to go, boss. And he would eventually go.
Well, you said he never said thank you. That's surprising.
Well, he was very confident, but I've always told the stories that I represented him in a number of matters, and with some success. And the first time I saw this was that he called me and asked me if I would, he had 2 tickets to a Bear football game in a skybox. Would I take my son with him, and the 3 of us go to the game? And I said, sure. So we go to the game, and he insisted my son sit between us. And I had represented him a recent redistricting case, and we'd saved his district. They wanted to kick him out of Congress, redistrict him out of his district, and they didn't succeed. And but then I didn't see him for 3 or 4 months. I get this call. We go to the game. He insisted that my son sit between us, and he just talked to him. He never talked to me. And at one point, he finally said to him, do you know your dad? Did your dad ever tell you that he represented me in this redistricting case and how important it was to me, and how we were successful? People didn't think we would be successful. And you know, I don't think I ever thanked him. And that was the way we would communicate. Yeah. He just could not personally, and I don't know anyone who said, he just couldn't say thank you, but he was wildly appreciative of what you did, and you sensed that.
Jackie, you went and worked in the administration. Do you have a favorite story?
There are so many different things I can tell you about Harold, but just talking about children, Harold loved children, and Tim often talks about the fact that he would get these early phone calls, and oftentimes he would go. Tim would be a part of the phone call and meeting with him. I would be there, but my son often went with me, particularly if it was on a Saturday. And Harold had a stationary bike that had been given to him by Dempsey Travis, and so as we were meeting in one room, Christopher was in his den with this bike. And after several meetings like that, Chris came out one day and said, Harold. And Harold always said, Mayor. Well, not Mayor, I'm not Harold. He wanted to, they had this game they were playing. And so after he got corrected, Chris would say again, Harold, do you ever ride that bike? Get out of here, boy, I'm busy. Harold, are you sure? Is your bike broken? Do you ever use it? Get out of here, boy. And finally, Chris said, Harold, the last time I was here, it said 10 miles. It still says 10 miles. Do you ever use this bike?
Those are great stories. Mayor Lightfoot, I'm sure in Ohio, I mean, you were seeing what was going on here in the city of Chicago. Did that resonate with you?
Well, I never met him in person, but I have a memory of him. When I was a junior in college, I was doing a semester in Washington, D.C., and I was working on the Hill for my local congressman. And it would have been spring of 1983, right as he was elected mayor. And for some reason, I found myself in a conference room in the Rayburn office building, and he had just been elected, and his colleagues were congratulating him. That was the first I knew of this man that obviously then became a dominant figure in Chicago. I had no notion at that time that I was going to eventually move to Chicago, but I remembered thinking something special had happened. And then that caused me to read more and find out that he was the first black mayor of Chicago. So I felt like I had this little glimpse into history that I can remember it vividly, even as I'm telling you this story.
Maybe a foreshadowing, who knows? Can you believe we had a black mayor in 1983? I mean, that was in one of the most segregated cities in the country. What was that like for you guys? And do you have survivor's remorse, knowing that you were at the top of this? You were there to see it, and then he was gone.
No, I think he had been thinking about the possibility for quite some time. He knew the need was there, and he wanted to make certain that the community came first. He was interested in changing that dynamic so that politics could work for the many, not just for the few. And the reason why I say that that was always in the back of his mind, the very first time I ever met Harold Washington, I was a new alderman, wet behind the ear. I didn't know anybody, and there was a housing problem in my then ward, the 4th Ward. And I was to be the guest speaker, so I was looking forward to that. I was going to get a chance to talk to some constituents. I arrived at the meeting, and here was Harold Washington waxing eloquently already from the pulpit, sitting next to the pastor. I thought, well, how did that happen? And so instead of me being introduced by the pastor, because I thought, well, the pastor knows everybody, I'm going to get a good word from the pastor asked him to introduce me. So here was Harold Washington, then a state representative, introducing me, the newest guy on the block, and he was saying, oh yes, Evans is bright and he's this and he's that, and he's probably going to be the first African-American mayor of the city of Chicago. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
Now, he knew I could not do that, but it had to be on his mind. Yeah. It was not a surprise to him that one was needed. One was talented, capable, and able from our community, and one could do it.
Obviously,
I was just going to say, keep in mind, though, 1983, this city was one of the last bastions to have a black mayor, right? Los Angeles had a black mayor for years, Maynard Jackson, in Atlanta, Cleveland, Gary. So the fact that one of the largest cities in the country finally crossed that threshold was momentous, but historically thinking across the country, I think many people felt like it's about time.
But with having that distinction of being the first black mayor of Chicago, Mayor, as you know, coming with distinction also comes with difficulty.
Yes.
And it could have easily not gone well, but for the person who had that distinction.
Well, I'll say this. I've spent a lot of time looking at his legacy, looking at how difficult it was for him to be able to govern. If you think about the fact that he gets elected, this is this big, historic, joyous occasion across Black Chicago, certain lakefront wards, but it was a threat to the old regime. And so in his first term, people talk about council wars, but really what you look at what he was able to accomplish, despite the fact that he didn't have a working majority in city council until into his second term, his executive orders are like ordinances. They're pages and pages long, different than the typical executive order. So he had to govern by executive fiat because he couldn't get things done. Couldn't get commissioners and boards populated with the people that he picked because city council blocked it. Most of his commissioners, and these folks know it better than I do, acted as acting and not fully vested with the powers, but he persevered despite that fact. And I think that's a really important part of his legacy, being able to govern at a time when a lot of things are working against you. That, I think, is an important part of his legacy that we need to be able to lift up.
And Jackie, you can speak specifically to that, can't you?
No, I was just going to say the one thing that was not obvious to the public is that in spite of having only 21 aldermen, we were able to get things done, as Tim knows, because those 29 knew that the power was still in the mayor's office. And they always wanted something or another. And so Harold was a politician. So if you wanted this, you know about quid pro quo, right? So so a lot of things we got done in spite of their publicly raising their fists and doing all of that stuff, is that they were in the back room. In my office and in Harold's office, we were getting things done. And then we get out to the council, and Tim would be there as finance chair and run it right on through. But yeah, we did a lot of work out of the eye of the cameras.
Before leaving office, I did the final interview with Mayor Daley, Richard M. Daley, and I asked him what political experience stuck out in his mind the most, and he said, losing to Harold Washington, because it humbled him. And I wonder, Judd, maybe we'll start with you. Were there things that you saw in Mayor Daley's record-setting time as mayor that you said, oh, he learned that by watching Harold? Or no?
Well, I'll be honest, I can't think of anything.
Well, one of the things that stands out for me was he did a press conference, or it was written up in the media, that he had appointed more women to city government than anybody in history.
Was he a man before his time?
No, Harold had done it before him. Harold was really the first one that really, pulled women in. And so I had to respond. I did an article in Cranes rebutting everything that Richard M. Daley had said about that, because we were very proud of the number of women we had brought into government.
But Harold was way ahead of himself on all kinds of fronts. He and, as I recall, he and Ralph Metcalf broke with Old Man Daley over police brutality.
Exactly
and they were
right.
obsessed with it.
Yep.
And when Daley, and they weren't going to back down, and when Daley offered meaningless compromises or work things out, they went their own ways, and they became the independent forces within the political structure, because the issue was just too important. And Harold had a wonderful sense of keeping his eye on the ball. He didn't get distracted. He wasn't petty. There was a lot of nastiness that went on, but he was never vindictive. He was never out to get even.
How did he keep his cool amidst all of
It was
this?
sort of I think that he had enormous self-confidence.
He got angry, but
He really
had
thought that
self-control.
he had a wonderful sense of what he was about, and he had confidence that he was doing the right thing, and that he was a person you could talk to and could change his mind. He just fit in well, and so that it was easy for him to just let that roll off his back and keep his eye on the ball. And he was always interested, well, is there some way we can do this with an executive order? Is there some way we can get around this in some other way? And we had, at a time when affirmative action was running into a lot of headwinds, we drafted lots of affirmative programs, all of which were focused on accomplishing the end of diversifying, but doing it in ways that didn't highlight the confrontations you're creating. So, for example, with police and fire, we came up with a whole concept of race norming so that you could put together lists and then you didn't have to jump people to highlight what was going on. The list was just taken in order, but the equality that was necessary was worked out within the structure, and he was very sensitive to those kinds of things. So he wasn't about sticking it in the people's faces or anything. This is what we're going to try to accomplish, and what's the best way to do it, and let's get at it.
He had no revenge in his thrust at all. Not interested in it. All he wanted to do was to win. If he could accomplish what he sought to accomplish, that was good enough for him. He was going to bring women in no matter what. Not only if it had to be by an executive order, fine, but not only women, Latinos, people who came in from another country, people who were gay or lesbian, people who were not welcome at the table then. He welcomed them, taking nothing from anybody else. He said, what is out there is broad enough for everybody, and that everybody deserved it. And that's all he wanted, no revenge. And the people who thought he was coming in, he's going to take everything from white people, no, not at all. He wanted to make sure that he would take something like sidewalk revenue so everybody could get new sidewalks. I can remember colleagues from the 29 saying, I know, Tim, you're going to get all those sidewalks, aren't you? I said, no, I'm going to get my share, you're going to get your share. It's going to be spread throughout all 50 of the wards. And that's exactly what he did on little things and big things. He said, well, let's help the city of Chicago. Let's see what we could do about helping the Chicago Theater. And by the way, I'm going to help the Regal Theater on the South Side. He said, let's see what we could do on the northwest side of the city. O'Hare Airport needs expansion. We'll do that. But we're also going to expand McCormick Place. That's the way he was. He wasn't trying to take anything from anybody. He was trying to give something to everybody. And that was the key to his administration.
So the thing that I have heard from people that spent a lot of time talking with him, particularly in his first term, he was very focused on uniting the city. If you think about how divisive the campaign was, Bernie Epton before it's too late, I mean, the city could have come apart. And particularly if he hadn't been the kind of leader that he was, where he was going to take retribution against those folks. That didn't happen with him because he understood that in order for the city to function and to move forward, he had to unite people. And I will say that, going back to your original question about Mayor Richard M. Daley, I think that is a page that he tried to take from Harold Washington's book. And I'm not going to ever question Madam Grimshaw, but I will say that the one thing that's, again, interesting and against type with Richard M. Daley was he empowered a lot of black women. There were a lot of black women that were commissioners, and frankly, a lot of black women that have gone on to lead very lucrative professional careers. Once they, Valerie Jarrett. I mean, there's just a number of people who he empowered as black women, gave them very prominent roles. But again, I think really, if you think about it, that is borrowing a page from the Harold Washington book and what he did in empowering people who had never seen the inside of the mayor's office and City Hall and bringing them to the table.
Do you see any similarities in your administration and his? And you guys join in on that too. Do you see similarities in Washington's administration and Mayor Lightfoot?
Well, I think the thing that we have tried to do, which is definitely right out of Harold Washington's playbook, in part because I feel this kind of tug of history, we've really focused on investing in black and brown neighborhoods that really haven't been invested in heavily, probably since Harold Washington died in November of 1987. So that is very much from what he saw, his vision of equity and inclusion, and we're unapologetic about doing that.
But he also, he always felt it was incumbent for him to get into the neighborhoods that were not sympathetic with his views and where we were going. When we had our first started having town halls, the first ones were on the northwest and southwest side of the city of Chicago, where the audience was not so receptive, but he thrived on that. He didn't get bitter, and that's when one of the first episodes on the northwest side, a woman got up and gave a fairly hostile speech about how unfair he must be, and he's only favoring blacks, and they're paying a price, and she's thinking of leaving the city. And he looked at her and he smiled and he said, "Lady, you can run and you can hide, but we're going to find you and we're going to be fair to you." And
I love it.
The audience melted. It was just, and he could do that because his confidence. He believed that, and this wasn't made up. It wasn't show. And if you were with him, you sensed how deeply he felt about all this fairness and opening things up, breaking down barriers, and there were plenty of barriers that he had. I mean, in all honesty, Harold wasn't so comfortable with working with women when he became mayor.
Hold that thought. We'll come back to that right after that. We'll be right back. April 12, 1983 was an historic day, with Mayor Washington winning the election to become Chicago's first black mayor.
But the challenges were in fact just beginning. We take you inside council wars next.